Hello, it's Tessa, one of the news editors here at Manx Radio, back with you for another episode of Newscast. And before we start this one, I'll just give you a warning that this contains information you may find distressing. We're going to be discussing sexual offending. Now, police say they want to reassure people that the Isle of Man is a safe place to live and attacks by strangers are extremely rare. It follows the sentencing of 43-year-old Mohammed Jabbar, who sexually assaulted a vulnerable teenage girl in Douglas in July last year. The former Duke Street resident was jailed for 6 years and 8 months in February after admitting 4 offences. Jabbar had followed the 13-year-old through the city centre in a case officers have described as out of the ordinary. You can find out more about this story if you missed it when we covered it back in February by going to manxradio.com. Police have since praised the girl for her courage in reporting the incident and for her continued courage throughout the court process. Detective Inspector Nick Haxby is from the Protecting Vulnerable People investigation team and led the investigation.
This incident, it was an isolated and opportunistic incident. The defendant and the victim weren't known to each other, and the defendant, his actions, straight away when he interacted with the victim, he would have seen that she was in a vulnerable state. It would have been obvious. And he had a number of choices that night, what to do, and one of them would have been to assist the victim and call the police, but unfortunately he didn't make that choice. He made the decision to exploit the victim and for his own personal sexual gratification. Despite the vulnerabilities that the victim was showing, I do have to commend her courage for firstly telling someone what had happened to her that night, but also secondly, also telling the police when the police spoke to her, but also her continued courage throughout the court and police process. This wasn't an easy thing for her to go through. From the outset, it was clear that we were dealing with what we call a stranger incident. And as obvious as it may sound, it's where we don't know any known links between the victim and the offender. To reassure the public, all I can say is that these types of investigations and incidents are thankfully extremely rare on the Isle of Man, and they're also extremely rare in the UK. And statistically, offences of this severity and type are between persons that are actually known to each other.
And obviously these two weren't known to each other, so what followed after she obviously told the police what had happened was an investigation from your team. Now, she couldn't identify him because she didn't know who he was, but your team worked very diligently and very quickly actually to try and establish who he was and what had happened on that evening. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about some of the work that went into that investigation?
I would like to say that it wasn't just my team that were involved in this, because of as soon as we'd heard the facts of this, we knew we were dealing with something out of the ordinary, and there were other officers and colleagues that were involved in this. Our main focus was obviously speaking with the victim and getting as much information and evidence that we can from her. But it was also quite clear that the way that we'd be able to bring this to a conclusion would have been through CCTV and the inquiries in the lower Douglas area, which was what the main focus was for the first week of this investigation. Whilst the officers are dealing with the CCTV side of the investigation, my team from the PVPI were obviously dealing with the victim and dealing with the family. And yeah, it was through some extremely good detective work from some of the officers that were on the CCTV inquiries that we were able to identify the suspect and quickly arrest him and bring him to police headquarters.
And I just wanted to touch on him just for a moment, because we saw after this case had concluded in the courtroom that obviously the public had quite a lot to say about it. We know that Mohammed Jabbar was from Pakistan. He was on the island legally and he wasn't known to the police ahead of this incident. Is that correct?
That's correct. I am aware that a very small number of the public, they were expressing opinions on social media in relation to the defendant, his employment and his residency on the island. And as soon as we were able to identify the suspect, we conducted detailed inquiries in relation to his employment, his residency status, and there were no known concerns about him or his employment status. He was here legally. And I would like to plead to the members of the public to not stereotype by wrongfully labelling workers of late night food outlets that may or may not have an ethnic background as an offender. This was an isolated but despicable crime committed by the defendant towards a young, vulnerable child. These actions are not reflective on any of the ethnic community that are living and working on the Isle of Man. These were the actions of one individual that made the decision to commit an extremely serious sexual offence against the victim. And it was with some extremely dedicated and thorough police work we were able to identify him in the first instance, but also bring him to justice.
And we heard in court, obviously, about the impact of his offending, both on the victim and on her family. I think in the victim impact statements that were read out, there was a particularly poignant statement, I would say, that the family basically said that they believed that the Isle of Man was a safe place to bring up a family. Can you understand why they don't feel like that anymore?
I do. All I can assure the family, and we have spoken to the family at length, is that the Isle of Man is a safe place. Statistically, it's probably one of the safest places, certainly in Europe, if not in the planet, if you look at crimes. But with social media these days, when things do happen, the more at the forefront and people are aware of them, but it is an extremely safe place to live, and it's just unfortunate that this individual took the opportunity when he seen it.
And obviously in your work with the Protecting Vulnerable People investigation team, you obviously deal with a wide range of people who have gone through traumatic experiences. Could you just explain to our listeners a little bit more about what your team does, what its purpose is, and who the people are that you help?
I am biased. I think I'm extremely lucky that I've got such a dedicated team. They work tirelessly when investigating the most abhorrent offences that you could imagine. My team currently consists of 6 detective constables and 1 detective sergeant, and the investigations that we deal with are the more complex and serious of sexual offences, both historic and acute. And this, unfortunately, does include offences against vulnerable children and adults. The type of work that we deal with, we also deal with offences relating to indecent images of children, and obviously with the new introduction of the new Sexual Offences and Obscene Publications Act that came into force in March 24, all of the offences that are under the new legislation that we investigate.
I believe that legislation actually has led to your team being much busier than perhaps you'd been in the past. I think the Home Affairs and Justice Minister recently told Tynwald that the team was being stretched because of the introduction of this new legislation, and actually that she was going to find some more budget to try and make your team a little bit bigger. So I'm guessing the more resource you've got, the more people that you can help.
My background is as being a detective. I've been a detective constable within as what it was called then, the Public Protection Unit. I was the sergeant within that team, and we've always been an extremely busy team with small numbers of staff. The introduction of the new legislation, there has been an increase in offences being reported. It's a hard one to put your finger on why is that. Is it because of, and I think what it comes down to is that we've got so many more offences that we can now deal with under the new legislation that we're able to, when we get a report or someone coming forward to say what's happened to them, we've now got an offence that we're able to investigate, whereas previously it was limited. Mm-hmm. But also we've had some fantastic results in the last few years through the courts that have been, out in the public, which I think also gives a lot of confidence to the public into when to report that they may get some justice and results at the end of it.
And for some people, I think I'm right in saying that they can be reluctant to report, but also that reporting doesn't necessarily have to mean that a criminal process will follow. Is that right? So people can come forward and just share their experience with you with no fixed view as to what would happen next.
That's correct. There's a number of avenues that a complainant can report, and that is either directly to the police, where my team will speak to them. They will find out what the complaint is, but they'll also have an honest and open discussion with the complainant to manage their expectations, where they'll fully explain what the process would be in terms of making a formal police complaint and what needs to be done. But we do have, and it is a regular occurrence, where people will come forward and they will tell us what's happened, and they won't want to pursue any formal complaint. And part of that, for them doing that, is a process of them trying to, it's almost like a healing process, that they want to get it off off their back. My team will always leave if that's the decision they make, is we will record it, and if they don't want to pursue a complaint, the door is always there for them to come back at a later stage if they wanted to make a formal complaint.
Because as you said, I imagine a lot of your work is actually dealing with historical offences that maybe happened many, many years ago and perhaps only sort of come back into people's minds if they're triggered by something, or perhaps if they see a similar report of a similar case going through court. So effectively the door's always open and the door's never closed, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense, absolutely. Like I say, we get reports from other avenues as well. People come direct to us, but they also go through like victim support, quite irregular. We have a really good working relationship with victim support, and if the person is consenting, then if someone had gone to victim support, then victim support will contact us for us to make contact with that person. But yeah, there's other avenues from the sexual offences referral centre is another avenue that someone could report, and with the new facility that's due to be opened hopefully in a few months, there'll be a self-referral process where if someone wants to refer themselves and make an allegation or provide the details of what's happened to them, that process is there, with the understanding that they don't have to speak to the police.
We know that the work to create this sort of standalone sexual assault referral centre has been ongoing. We know that it's progressing well, and as you say, hopefully open later this year. What sort of difference do you think having a facility like that on the Isle of Man will make?
It's just going to bring us up to the required standard that's currently in place in the UK. We have a current process at the moment which is very similar to the new facility that's being built. However, this facility is going to be fantastic. I do have to say that. We've got a fantastic team of clinical leads working at the SARC they are driving this over the line. They're so dedicated to make sure this works and is finished on time. Yeah, so we're hoping that the building will be finished towards the end of May, with a sort of an opening towards the back end of June to July, hopefully. The facility is just going to be fantastic, to the point where if someone wants to make a complaint, it's one facility in one place, and they will be seen by the doctor first and foremost for any medical, and they'll be seen for the medical conditions if they've got any injuries, etc. But then if they want the police to become involved, we'll be notified, and then we will go to that facility where we will see them and talk them through the next steps of the process, hopefully ultimately go into a court.
Obviously, with any investigation that comes through the court process, it's not simply the police that have been working alone on it. I guess it's a collaborative effort between a number of different sort of organisations and entities.
Absolutely. We couldn't do this without the assistance from our colleagues, and that would be colleagues from victim support, colleagues from the SARC referral centre, but also the close working relationship we have with the Attorney General's chambers. Over the last few years, the UK have introduced new guidance in relation to dealing with serious sexual offences, and it's called Operation Satira. We work to the best practice of that, and my team are trained to an extremely high standard, and that includes on island and off island training. But the work that we have and the liaison that we have with the Attorney Generals to try and make the process as quick and as fluid as we can is fantastic, and we do have that real good relationship with them.
And you mentioned victim support there. We know that they are a very well-respected charity on the Isle of Man. They do an awful lot of work for people. I'm guessing that they are another option for people that are just perhaps seeking out whether they want support or not. Perhaps are they sort of sometimes a good first step for people maybe to open up sort of the conversation about what might happen if they wanted to report something? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and victim support, they've got an amazing team down there, and it, like I said previously, it's quite regular that we will get a report via victim support. They are an independent service to the police, and if someone speaks to them, they want to speak to them in confidence, then that's where it stands and that's where it stays. However, if they do want to further that with the police, that's when we will get the phone call. But the victim support and other agencies, I'll Listen, are also another outlet that have been used, and they all have their own crisis workers.
Detective Inspector Nick Haxby there, speaking to me about the work of the Protecting Vulnerable People investigation team. And if you've been affected by any of the issues in this report, there are details of local organisations that provide advice and support at manxradio.com.